TV.
It's good to see you guys tonight. What I'd like to do tonight is basically we're doing a makeup service. From last Shabbat we were snowed out, and for those who are watching on IsraelNet, our portion was Beshalach, or Exodus 13:17 through 17:16. For the Haftorah we read Isaiah 43 1 through 13, Psalm 139, and we had a collection of Brit Chadashah portions. We had Mark 9 17 through 29, Luke 3 15 through 18, 2 Thessalonians 1 1 through 8, and if you'd like to read 2 Peter chapter 3, that would be helpful as well. Also, this is part of a series. I started it back with Bereshit, with the beginning readings, this Torah cycle. And so if some things here don't make sense, it's going to be because I'm building on a foundation, but you should be able to understand most of it. And just in a nutshell, what we're saying is we're referring back to King Solomon's preparation of the silver and gold vessels between two cities called Sartan and Sukkot. And that means between Tribulation and Sukkot. And that's how we are tested and tried and poured out and molded as we are prepared to be taken to a permanent temple. We're poured out and molded east of the Jordan. And so the title tonight is The Miracle Monster, or Distinction or Extinction. Are we distinguished, or will we be extinguished? That's the question. So is there really such thing as a Loch Ness monster? Is it the truth? Or is it a legend? It would be a miracle if there were a prehistoric monster in a modern lake. But maybe there is a primeval miracle monster. Maybe like Jonah's great fish, that monster could signal either our extinction or our rebirth to distinction. Where am I getting this? The Hebrew words for a sign or a miracle, Ness, that's what it's called, not as in Loch Ness, but there's a sound alike. Sign or miracle, Hebrew is a Ness. A test, though, is a nisayon. They come from the same root. If we want to see a miracle, a Ness, then we must expect the test, the nisayon. The creation week was one of signs and miracles, at least from a human perspective. Form came from chaos. It was a place that was yet unlivable for us. Yet we know that Adonai operates without hindrance in such an environment. That's what it said in the Psalm. It said darkness and light, they're alike to Adonai. There's no difference to him. So he did not need this creation. We did. He created it for us. He operates without any kind of hindrance. Whether you're talking about darkness, fire, deep water, it doesn't matter. He can call forth creation, a physical world, from chaos, or he can continually recreate those who obey him. And that is a pattern that you're going to see all through Scripture. And that's our challenge tonight. It's to understand that the signs and the miracles, the nisim, that's the plural of creation, continue to remanifest, not just in the Passover story, but in all of Scripture. Not just in the Exodus, but in human lives today. The creation continues to bring new birth. It's active in our lives, and it will do one of two things. It will either press us and squeeze us to a new birth of distinction, or, like Pharaoh, it will carry us to extinction. It will carry us back to the blackness of the chaos from which the world was formed. Those signs and those miracles of water and fire, I want you to notice something from the scripture reading today. They're alike to Adonai. They are not seen as different. Consider this verse from the Song of the Sea. It says, "The deeps cover them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, is majestic in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. And in the greatness of your excellence, you overthrow those who rise up against you. You did send forth your burning anger, and it consumes them as chaff." You see, this song is referring to the Hebrew salvation as though it occurred in a fire. But it's very clear that it occurred in water. So it's alike. That's what I'm trying to say. The darkness and the light, there's no difference to Adonai. It's for our benefit. The fire and the water, it's all alike to Adonai, but it's for our benefit. It teaches us something. That fire and water through which the Hebrews were saved was also through obedience to his command. Stand still and then go forward. They had to obey in order to see that miracle. Otherwise, it would have become their destruction as well, not just Pharaoh's. Obedience brings rebirth. Disobedience brings destruction. We have to obey the commandments. Human beings are constantly being tested. A test, remember, is a nisayon. And it will correspond to one of the banner miracles of the creation, a nes. The test can either rally us to a new birth, or it can devour us in monstrous chaos. The only question is our obedience. In our Torah portion from Beshalach, there are tests that parallel the nisim, the miracles of creation. And these are the benchmarks, and this is what I want you to take away from this. All I want you to see is the pattern. So that when it's happening in your life, or when you're reading through Scripture and trying to understand what's happening, you can identify it and say, hey, just like she said, it's teaching me about the creation. It's pointing back to a miracle of the creation. That's why I'm going through this tribulation. He's testing me with the creation test. And that means that I am on the verge of a creation miracle. We can see these benchmarks by which we're tested. Each succeeding act of creation comes out of some form of tribulation, some sort of pressure. From the chaos is extracted life and promise. And these are the miracle standards of our lives. They were finished from the foundation of the world. Every test you've ever been through was finished back during the creation week. There's another Hebrew word for an extraordinary act or a miracle, and it's called pele or phele. Ose phele, when we sing, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods in Hebrew, we say Ose phele, he who does wonders, who does miracles. And that is spelled with a pe, a lamed, and an aleph. The pe is the mouth. And it means to face towards something. The lamed is teaching and instruction. And the aleph is the first or the fundamental thing. So what is a miracle? All a miracle is for you to understand that you were supposed to face toward the teaching of the foundation, of the fundamental, the first acts of creation. That's all a miracle is. It's pointing you back to the miracles of the creation week. He's asking you, turn and look at those. Face those and you will understand what is happening to you. Because those fundamental teachings of creation are teaching us that that gospel message was finished from the foundation of the world. It was already done. It's for us the same Adonai that led forth the children of Israel through a wall of water. It's the same Adonai that's fighting for us. We forget that sometimes. We think he's weak, but he's not. He's given us the creation. He's given us the Passover to teach us that he is strong. And it's already finished. The only question is, how will we respond? In Exodus 4:10, it says, Then Moshe said to the Lord, Please, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither recently nor in the time past. Remember the Aleph, the first, the fundamental, the primary teaching. Nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And the Lord said to him, Who has made man's mouth? Who made it? I made it. I created it. If I made it, then I can use it. Man's mouth, the peh. Or who makes him dumb and deaf? Or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and even I will be your mouth, your peh, and teach you what you are to say. He's saying, expect a miracle. What he wants Moshe to do is go back to Pharaoh and teach him the gospel of the creation week, those first oracles of God. Pharaoh can never say that he was not taught, that he never saw a sign or a wonder. I'm going to show you some examples here of how the Exodus story fits right down into the creation week. Example 1. I'm taking this from Exodus 14:21. It says, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind. Remember, that's the Ruach Hadima, that ancient separating spirit. It's a very violent, hot spirit, and you always want it on your side. You never want it after you. He blew that sea back by a strong east ruach all night and turned the sea into dry land so that the waters were divided. Now compare that to the Hebrews' test of faith. And God said there will be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it, and it was so. God called the expanse sky, or Shemayim. And there was evening and there was morning the second day, and God said, Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and gathered the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. They thought they were pressed on every side, but he created something good for them. He showed them and taught them the gospel of the creation week, the separating of the waters and the dry land. Here's another example. In Genesis 1:1, it says, In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Key word there. And the Spirit of God was hovering. In Hebrew, that's mecharefet. It's like a bird violently beating its wings as it descends. It's not a nurturing sort of hovering. It's very violent, and it stirs up a lot of wind, a lot of ruach. It's a warning, actually. If you've ever seen a mother hen try to warn her chicks, she'll start beating her wings quickly. It's the same motion. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now compare the promise of the hovering spirit of creation with the judgment of Pharaoh's army that sent it back to the chaos of the deep. In Exodus 15:4, it says, Pharaoh's chariots and his army he's cast into the sea, and the choicest of his officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deeps cover them. They went down to the depths like a stone. It's the same word, the deeps. In Hebrew, remember, the earth was tohu and bohu. It was formless and void. That's where Pharaoh's army went, right straight into that black void. This was a creation miracle. And it's interesting that the most distinguished officers became the extinguished officers through disobedience. Here's another example. Genesis 1:14 says, Then God said, Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons. That's Moedim. That's Adonai's calendar, not the world's. his Moedines, his appointed seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. The calendar was set the creation week. We changed it. He never has. Now compare the creation of a calendar, the creation week, this benchmark, to Pharaoh's test of obedience concerning the release of the Hebrew slaves. Exodus 10:21, then the Lord said to Moshe, stretch out your hand toward the sky, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even a darkness which may be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days, but all the sons of Israel had light in their dwellings. The Egyptians couldn't see. They were like blind people. But the Hebrews had light. All succeeding generations who were blind to Adonai's Moedim, his calendar, are just as blind as the Egyptians were, because they have eyes and they don't see it. They don't see that gospel that was laid down concerning the calendar and the creation week. And Yeshua came to heal that. I don't know what people think he came to do, but he came to heal that blindness to the creation calendar. Exodus 5:1 says, thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a feast to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice? Wow, that's a pretty hard rejection of the creation calendar. And so let's think real hard about what it really means to obey the gospel. Rarely do you hear someone teach a message on obeying the gospel. We talk all the time about obeying the commandments, but what does it mean to obey the gospel? Like Peter and Paul urge us to do. It means to go back and to obey the calendar of the creation week when the gospel was set on its foundation. Example 4. Consider the same text that we had above, the creation of calendar signs to test whether the Hebrews would accept Adonai's calendar or not. Exodus 12:1. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month they are each to take a lamb for themselves, according to their fathers' households, a lamb for each household. There's the calendar test. Will you accept this as the first of the month? Will you go according to the creation calendar? Salvation, redemption, and rebirth followed the Hebrews' obedience to that calendar. They were reborn. Example 5. Even before the creation of the sun and the moon and the stars for Adonai's calendar, there was already light. Remember that? There was a primeval separation of light from darkness. In Genesis 1:3 it says, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and morning one day. That's before the sun and moon are created. Now compare that creation of a primordial light with the test of whether the Hebrews would follow that primeval light into the wilderness. Exodus 12:21. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. It's all alike to him. We're the ones who needed that primeval light. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. He's there again, the creation week. These examples show us that when we relate the Passover story to our children, we're retelling the story of creation. We are relaying the foundation that was given the creation week. And it's just like Jimmy taught us last week at Passover. It was as though the children of Israel came out of a womb. That blood on the doorpost, they emerged. It was a new birth of freedom. That sign of blood on the doorpost was a ness. It was a sign. It was a miracle. A nation would be born in one day as each Hebrew family emerged from its own door, out of a womb of darkness into that light of creation. What was death to the disobedient became salvation, Yeshuat, to the obedient who consumed the flesh, which is basar, remember. It means gospel. When you consume the flesh, you consume the gospel, the basar. And it said you're to consume that flesh of the Lamb, the gospel, in one house. Just one house. In that creation week, Adonai labored to give birth to our universe and to miraculously create the climate to sustain perfect physical human life because he didn't need it. He didn't need it created for himself. When we endure tribulations, Mitzrayim means Egypt, right? It also means from miseries, from tribulation. That's the root of Egypt, is tribulation. When we endure these tribulations, we are enduring things that squeeze us and make us work hard. That root word, sar, for tribulation, not only means tribulation, it means squeezing through a narrow place. It means you're hemmed in tight. There's nowhere to go, and there's more and more pressure being exerted upon you. That's why it's like birth. That's why it's pretty pointless to resist it as well. Faithful persistence in labor will result in a miracle of birth into a climate better suited to a mature life. Notice that both Adam and Eve were cursed with labor pains. Have you ever noticed that? To Adam it says, you will sweat and toil over the earth, because that was the womb of his flesh. He said, I took you from that, and now you're going to toil, sweat, you're going to labor over it. To Chava, to Eve, it was pain and labor. But they both had the curse of the labor. What would be caused when you bring forth birth? These are tzara, these are tribulations, which progressively bring the gospel to the earth. What is the gospel? It's the flesh. It's the basar that we consume at Passover. It's a Messiah of flesh who would both travail under the curse of his father Adam with toil, blood, sweat, and tears. But not only would he travail, he would prevail in the resurrection spirit of his Abba Elohim. So we have to travail before we can ever hope to prevail in the spirit. He would distinguish himself by obedience in order to extinguish the dark chaos of the curse. In order to prepare us for the tests between Passover and that great millennial Sukkot that's coming, Adonai prepares us by giving us our first glimpse of Sukkot at Passover. He declares the end from the beginning. That's what we've been saying all along. But notice this, what would seem to be an insignificant phrase in the Torah reading. It says in Exodus 13:20, it says they set out from Sukkot and camped in Etam on the edge of the wilderness. Etam means their plowshare. Sukkot, which we know is the place of the final festival of the season, of the Moedim. And it says that you will celebrate Sukkot when you've gathered in from your wine press and your... what else? Wine press and your threshing floor. So where did they start out from? They start out from Sukkot with their plowshares. He gives you a glimpse of the end from the beginning to encourage you. And that's what Etam is alluding to. By sending them to a place of Sukkot with their plowshares, he's saying that there will be a final celebration in Messiah that's going to make all that's about to happen to you worth every bit of it. I'm going to give you a glimpse of the future. And remember, it says Messiah, it's in the blessing that we read after the meals. It says he sowed his seed weeping, but he returns in joy, carrying his sheaves with him. This is what we have to remember at Passover. He's going to give us a glimpse of the millennial reign. Even though we are sowing our seed weeping in tribulation, sorrow, distress, pressed on every side, nowhere to turn, nowhere to go, he gives us a glimpse of glory. A time when we will gather in from the threshing floor and from the winepress. Yeshua is a man of war. Make no mistake about it. There will be a war at Sukkot, a big one. Because where to us bringing in the produce from the threshing floor and from the winepress is a blessing, To those who are disobedient, it will be a return to the chaos. That is war, and it's described very well in Revelation and the prophets, that will be a time of their tribulation. But for us, he shows us from Passover a sukkot where we can turn our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks for the harvest of the goodly nations who will obey the gospel. Not just hear it, not just believe it, but obey the gospel. This vision of the millennial reign can sustain us through the tests if we can keep our first love of Passover. We can't let that slip away. We have to keep our first love. And that's why we can see Sukkot paired so many times with Passover in Scripture. Remember Yeshua's entry into Jerusalem? They're throwing palm branches in front of us, saying Hoshiana as though it's Sukkot, but it's Passover. But it's a foretaste. His disciples needed to see that, because they were about to go through some stuff. And remember when they saw him on the Mount of Transfiguration with Eliyahu, with Moshe? And they said, oh, let us build Sukkot for you here. And he said, not time, but you needed to see this. You needed to see what we would be like, transfigured and speaking as one. He gives his disciples a glimpse, and this is what sustained them through that tribulation that was ahead of them. They died violent deaths. Horrible deaths, painful deaths. But they had a vision at Passover of that Sukkot. The story of Egypt is a story of distinction and extinction. Every step in the unfolding plan of redemption requires that a man such as Moses or a woman such as Ruth separate himself or separate herself from the expectations of one's family or nation in order to distinguish himself in obedience. This separation from what is known, comfortable, safe, is rewarded with a holier rebirth. For those who have been called to distinction and who have been given a vision of that day that is all Shabbat, the Sukkot reign of Messiah Yeshua, there's a caution. There's a price. There's a cost. It says in Hebrews 4:1, let us therefore fear lest a promise being left of us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them. It's referring to the children of Israel in the wilderness. They heard the gospel of the creation week as well as we did. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. Another translation says, because they were not united by faith. They didn't gather together. If you want to obey the gospel, you're going to have to obey his calendar, and his calendar commands us to unite, to come together, to celebrate his festivals. For which we have believed, do enter into rest, as he has said, as I have sworn in my wrath, if they shall enter into my rest, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world. They were finished from the foundation of the world. That's what he's referring to. The Hebrews and the mixed multitude who died in the wilderness heard that same gospel, that same basar. They ate the same flesh. They had the same message that we have. And they saw creative signs and miracles, but they did not walk in obedient faith, even though the work of Yeshua was finished from the foundation of the creation. Adonai asks us to separate, not so that we will become extinct, but in order to make us distinctly prepared for that kingdom of rest in the flesh, in the gospel, in the basar. From the beginnings, Adonai used the principle of separation. He separated upper from lower waters, light from darkness, land from sea, male from female, Sabbath from other days, Abraham from the nations, and the nations according to the number of the children of Israel who went down to Egypt. And these separations guard us from extinction as a holy people. Progressively, Adonai teaches separation as an act of creation. The tests we endure in these lower waters prepare us for the upper waters of heaven. For Yeshua taught us to pray, may your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Yeshua says a tested bride is a heavenly bride. Yet, we're flesh, just as he. He said, touch me, handle me. To Thomas, go ahead, touch me, I'm flesh, I'm just like you. But it's glorified. You get a glimpse of what you will be. The goal of creation is for a sinless human body on earth to reflect that heavenly nature. That's the gospel. That's a mystery of the gospel. Yeshua's humanity, his flesh. That's what basar means. Not just gospel, but the flesh. And this is why that flesh sacrifice was necessary on the altar. It's the reason the writer of Hebrews says that the gospel was preached. A sacrifice for sin had to teach that the Messiah would appear as a man of flesh. He was a man able to be tempted in every way, just as we are. His life and his death would demonstrate to us that the flesh could be made to come into congruence with the Spirit. It can be done, and we can imitate Yeshua. Just as Ezekiel says in 36:38, like the flock for sacrifices, like the flock at Jerusalem during her appointed feasts, so will the waste cities be filled with flocks of men. Then they will know that I am the Lord. How will they know that he is the Lord? When we assemble like flocks at his appointed feasts. That's the sign. That's the miracle. That's the standard. That's the banner. That's why the enemy works so hard to separate us from our Sabbaths and our festivals. Because there's no other way for the world to know. What does it mean to be poured out and molded between Sartan, Tribulation, and Sukkot? It's narrow, it's tight, it's a test, it squeezes to the point where we feel like we're trapped, we're tired, we're weary, we're hopeless, and there's no way out. And that's just where he wants us. And you're thinking, oh, I wish he wouldn't take me there so often. But there's value in it. It brings us one step away either from distinction or extinction. That's what the test does. In fact, that is the best description of Ness. A miracle is that it is a standard or a banner under which Adonai collects his faithful. It's a collecting point. Your test is a collection point for your soul. Obedience in the test does not merely lead you out of the chaos, it causes you to become united with flocks of people who are also passing obedience tests at the appointed feasts, and we obey the gospel calendar. Passover birthed a nation. It squeezed them forth from that womb of Egypt, from that chaos. And the squeezing continued. We thought we had it made once he squeezed us out of the church. No, it was just starting. The rebirthing process extended beyond being hemmed in at the final sea. It is fire and it's water of testing, yet we will walk through both water and fire and neither be drowned or burnt if we appreciate that Ness power of Adonai that's right there with us. 3 plagues were visited upon the Egyptians that also afflicted the Israelites. They went through it too. But the remaining 7 were distinctly visited upon the Egyptians while the Hebrews were unharmed. Light instead of darkness. Barley, a harvest instead of beaten straw. Flocks and herds for sacrifice instead of diseased carcasses. That final distinction was made between the firstborn protected by the blood of the Lamb and the firstborn of Egypt. And more literally, the Hebrews, which means the ones who crossed over. Those who crossed over to distinction were protected, while the most distinguished among the Egyptians were extinguished in their tribulations. The firstborn, that was choice, that was prime, and he took it away, back into the womb of chaos. It said the choice officers went down into the sea. He took their best, and he destroyed them. They were extinguished. Remember, it says Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by that strong east spirit, that Ruach Kadima, that separating spirit all night long. As the Israelites flee from the angry Egyptians, Adonai repeats a miracle of creation from the beginnings, the separation of waters from dry land. You notice both the Hebrews and the Egyptians are led of the Spirit. Be careful what spirit is leading you. Because to one people who are obedient, that angry, violent spirit was their salvation. It was their protection. But to the Egyptians who followed in disobedience, it became their destruction. It was an angry spirit of sinful flesh and pride that led them there. And there's the miracle. The Hebrews walked directly into the east wind, an ancient separating spirit. And that same hot and angry east wind that's responsible for plagues and withering crops and every sort of horrible, destructive thing, they walked straight into it in perfect safety. It did not harm them, because Moses told them it was the Yeshuat Adonai, the salvation of Adonai. Yeshua to the obedient is salvation, but that is not what he is to the disobedient. He separates, he protects, and he resurrects his own who walk in the Holy Spirit. They are Hebrews, and they cross over in faith, not in anger. Hebrews have a character of distinction that shines strongest when they're in danger of extinction. They cross from death to life in the midst of floods and fires of tribulation. Squeezing and tribulation to a Hebrew only squeezes out the impurities, and it reveals the precious metals of faith. Hebrews ride on the flood, and they stand with the living Torah in the midst of the fire, and they speak with him. The fire and the water, remember, they're all the same to Adonai and to his Hebrews and the mixed multitude that travels with them. Let's reread Exodus 12:35. It says, "Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from the children, and a mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a very large number of livestock." Livestock in that context is mikneh. Mikneh, that's livestock or cattle. The livestock who left Egypt represent the nations joining themselves to the covenant. Mikneh, cattle. It means from a purchase, something that has been bought. The nations who cross over from chaos to creation through obedience to the creation gospel are also Hebrews, and they're purchased by the Lamb's blood. And they also benefit from that primeval light of creation, and they are also planted as seed-bearing plants on the third day of creation. They have been purchased and planted on Mount Zion during the great Shabbat, the great dwelling of Sukkot. How do we know this? It says in Exodus 15:16, "Terror and dread fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm they are motionless as stone until your people pass over. O Lord, until the people pass over whom you have purchased." Even the cattle, mikneh, whom you have purchased, you will bring them and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your dwelling, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established. It didn't matter whether they were descended from a tribe or part of the mixed multitude. They had all been purchased, and they were all going to be planted on the third day. So what's our conclusion? What kind of separations and distinctions are we making as Hebrews awaiting our Messiah's return? Ultimately, aren't distinctions our own choices, our own actions? We are fearfully and wonderfully made in such a way that we can someday live in the upper and lower waters, unified. We can walk in both the lower and the upper fires without being harmed. But how can we do this? Through obedience to the one whose toil, his sweat, his tears, and his blood, it was shed and sprinkled in both the lower and the upper realms. As his people, we must learn when to separate, and we must learn when to unify. We must learn from whom to separate, and we must learn with whom to unify. We need to be in the right flock. We must be tested. We must know our calendar. The prophet Hosea refers to Ephraim as one who feeds on the east wind of violence. This was in his disobedience. And the prophets, if you read about Ephraim and the east wind, rebellious Israel never stands before the east wind. He's destroyed by it. Doesn't matter if you are Israel, disobedience is your destruction. We are not Hebrews if we feed on spirits of conflict and anger. Our end will be the same as Pharaoh's if we feed on that, because he did not understand the spirit that divided the waters from the waters. Only the faithful survived that separation because it was created for them. That's deep. You need to think about that a while. That miracle was created for them. The miracle that was created for you can also be your destruction. The only test is your obedience. Did you retain your first love the way that you were commanded to? The faithful will survive because that is a holy space. That miracle is a holy space. We might be frightened, but we can't turn back. We have to go forward. We have to wait for the nest, the miracle of creation, the miracle of rebirth, a new immersion into Messiah. He constantly rebirths us. Through every tribulation, every test, every trial, we're being reborn. Not in the reincarnation sense, but in the sense that He's renewing us the same way that He sustains the creation. A Hebrew understands that his suffering and his squeezings are the birth pangs of the Messiah, moving them toward that primordial light with resurrection power. And that's why it squeezes so hard. You thought your Messiah would be weak? When He presses you, He will squeeze hard. He's strong. He's a man of war. But the harder the squeeze, the closer you are to the light. So just let yourself be squeezed. Go toward the light. If we suffer in our own rebellion, though, then our flesh will be consumed. That is not our salvation. That is not our rebirth. It's destruction. He'll put you back into the blackness and try to call you out again with another test. But you will not be called out of it without a test. You will not come out of tribulation without being squeezed. So you may as well learn to enjoy it. He will transform our flesh so that we can dwell in that Holy of Holies. What's in the Holy of Holies? The miraculous. It's not just the commandments. Remember, it's Aaron's rod that miraculously budded. It was a bowl of the manna, the miraculous bread. If you want to go into the Holy of Holies, you had better learn to deal with the miraculous. And the only way you will learn to deal with the miraculous is to be tested, squeezed, and pressed. That's the nest. That's the standard that draws a nation together. If we have a vision of Sukkot, it will sustain us through the wilderness, the hunger, the deprivation, contention, death, thirst, war, weariness. He makes known to us the end from the beginning. From the Aleph, Yeshua is our Sukkot, our great Sabbath rest, our dwelling. And we get a foretaste of Him at Passover that's going to sustain us through all this work, growth, adversity, necessary for us to ripen into a full, creative, and sustained harvest of oil, grain, and wine, seasons that overtake one another. If we want to see the nest, we have to pass the Nisayon. Will we have faith when it seems there's no escape? Will we scatter and run? Or will we move forward as one flock, one assembly at His appointed seasons and obey His gospel? In some translations of the Brit Chadashah portion we read out of Mark, the boy that had the epilepsy is called a lunatic, which comes from the Greek. Lunatic in Greek means moon blindness. Are we lunatics? Are we moon blind? Are we blind to the witness of the creation at Passover, the beginning of months in our own calendar that He laid down at the foundation of the world? Do we often fall into the water and fall into the fire? Why? Because we're moon blind. We don't know our calendar. We don't know our appointed times or appointed seasons because we feed on the east wind and we follow after silly things instead of obeying that creation gospel. Are we deaf and dumb to our healing? If we would obey His commandments, obey His gospel, we would not be deaf and dumb. He came to fix that. He came to heal it. The prophet Isaiah said a time would come, and I'll read it again. 43, 1 through 11. Thus says the Lord, your Creator, O Jacob, He who formed you, O Israel, our Creator, from the foundation of the world. He formed us. He called us out of the womb. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I have given Egypt as your ransom, Cush and Seba in your place, since you were precious in my sight, since you were honored, and I love you. You hear that? He says we are honored, and he loves us. I will give other men in your place and other peoples in exchange for your life. Don't fear, I'm with you. I will bring your offspring from the east and gather you from the west. You will walk straight into that east wind, and it will not harm you. That's what he's telling you. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, don't hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name and whom I have created for my glory, whom I have formed, even whom I have made. It's the creation gospel. Bring out the people who are blind, even though they have eyes, and the deaf, even though they have ears. All the nations have gathered together in order that the peoples may be assembled. He's going to call us out of this deafness, this dumbness, this blindness. He's going to say, you don't have to be a lunatic anymore. You don't have to fall in the water and the fire. Know your Creator. Obey the creation gospel. The Spirit of Adonai is hovering over the face of the deep. He wants to honor us. He wants to love us with signs and miracles during our tests. He wants to distinguish us as his primeval creation. The only question is, will we be resuscitated to creative life? Or will we be swallowed by that Ness, monster of the deep? Will that miracle monster take you from the dark void of the deep to dry land? Or will he take you down to the depths, never to be seen again? Yeshua spent 3 days and 3 nights in the deep, in the fires, in the water. But he emerged transformed by the Spirit of creation, which continually recreates an obedient, faithful person. You know what? Not only should we be submerged into fire and water without harm, we should have fire shut up in our bones. It should be in here, inside. We should be scorching from the inside out, not just walk in it. Flamethrowers of the gospel. There should be water like Yeshua when he stood up at Sukkot and said, he who's thirsty, let him come to me and drink. As it said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. We should have water just flowing out. We should soak a room when we walk in. The flood's inside of you. It's nothing to be afraid of. The fire's inside of you. It's nothing to be afraid of if we obey the gospel. There is no fear. And we can actually prosper within these miracles of water and fire if we know the value of testing. And that's all I really want you to think about. Because I'm a prime example of one who does not like the test. But we should know the value of the test. And that's my question. Do we understand the value of the hard things we're going through? Because I think if we really knew how valuable they were, we wouldn't complain nearly so much.
to Israelnet.tv.